Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Oasis. Yes, got a big good morning from over here. Thank you. So my name is Maddie. I am our media director here, and I am so excited to be here this morning. I love being in our family, being here, and being with everyone. We're going to continue our series in the book of John today. I was thinking the other day, I'm like, wow, we've been in the book of John for like a long time. And I could imagine that if you come here and you're like, wow, we're in the book of John again. But as I read through each passage every week, there's just so much good stuff that we are learning about Jesus every single week. And it just gets me excited to learn more about Jesus and how we can become more like him. So yes, we've been in the book of John for a long time, but the information is still fresh and new. And honestly, we could read the same verse every week and still get something new out of it every week. So it just brings me so much joy to continue reading the word. And so the passage that we are going to be in this morning is John 13, 31 through 38. Here? All right. We'll just keep it there, I guess. And so this is where Jesus and his disciples, they're in the upper room. They're in the Last Supper. And so last week, David talked about how he predicted Judas's betrayal. And so Judas, in this section that we're about to read, Judas has just left the upper room. So now it's Jesus and his other 12 disciples. And we are going to hear about the 11th commandment. That's also what it's called. So the command to love one another. And we have heard this commandment, but it's called the new commandment because this is a different context. We've heard it before in Leviticus 19, love your neighbor as yourself. But in this context, we hear love one another. Just as I have loved you, you are to also love one another. So Jesus adds that just as I have loved you. So that is something that now we can take and we're like, okay, so this is what makes the commandment new, is we can love like Jesus because he set an example for us. And so if you are willing and able, if you please stand with me as we read this morning's passage. John 13, and we're going to start in verse 31. When he had left, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you a little while longer. You will look for me, and just as I told the Jews, so now I tell you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new command. Love one another. Just as I have loved you, you are also to love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." "Lord," Simon Peter said to him, "where are you going?" Jesus answered, "Where I am going, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow later." "Lord," Peter asked, "why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you." Jesus replied, "Will you lay down your life for me? Truly, I tell you, a rooster will not crow until you have denied me 3 times. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you that it's living, and thank you that we get to be here together and study it and just commune with you. I ask that my words be yours and not my own, and that you make it clear that what you're inviting us into. In your name I pray. Amen. You may be seated. So the first thing that we see in this passage in verses 31 and 32 is that when Jesus died on the cross, he showed his ultimate love for us. So verses 31 and 32, they say the word glorified 5 times. And that, when I first read, I was like, glorified, glorified. Jesus is glorified. God is glorified. Everyone's being glorified here. But what it's essentially saying is that by Jesus dying on the cross, God's glory is being seen for all of us. And Jesus now, after his ministry, he will be glorified, and everyone will see how deep and how ultimate God's love is for us. And so we baptized 4 people here a couple Sundays ago on Easter. And baptisms are a beautiful representation of the ultimate act of love for us. When you go into the water, you're being washed and you're made new. And so by Jesus dying on the cross, this is the way that we can show that I proclaim that I believe that Jesus died on the cross. And this act is so ultimate and so radical is because Jesus, the one who died, didn't deserve it. He didn't deserve this death at all. We're the ones who deserve death. But God sent his son, his perfect, holy, and blameless son, to die on the cross for all of our sins. Now, that's not fair, but God is he's acting out his justice. Because by Jesus dying, it's saying, well, all of the sins had to be paid for somehow. And so I'm going to send my son who is perfect so he can sacrifice his life so that everyone else can be saved. Now that's love. That's love. And I love that the passage starts off like that because this is an indication for us now when we read the new command. We can see that, okay, well, Jesus, he is looking to the cross when he thinks of love. So when we think of love, we should then be looking at the cross too. And so the way D.A. Carson talks about the new commandment is he says, the new command is simple enough for a toddler to memorize and appreciate, profound enough that the most mature believers are repeatedly embarrassed at how poorly they comprehend it and put it into practice. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. This is said so perfectly, in my opinion, because when you hear love one another, you're like, okay, cool. Or love your neighbor as yourself, you're like, yeah, I can love. But when he said how poorly us believers comprehend it and understand it, God's love is one that surpasses all understanding. And so it's really hard for us to grasp how deep this love is for us. And so we fail at it over and over again, but God's grace is big enough to cover us. And so we continue to walk and pursue and love people, and brokenly, because we're all broken people, but we can still love people well because we have an example of how Jesus loved us. And so we're going to walk through 4 practical ways of how we can act out this love and how we can love like Jesus because he first loved us. So first, Jesus invites us to take a greater interest in others. Invites us to take a greater interest in others. So I moved to Tucson it'll be 5 years ago now. It still blows my mind because it just feels like it was yesterday. But when I first moved to Tucson, on the first day of work, I met this sweet friend of mine. Her name is Grace. Many of y'all will probably know her. She is one of David's daughters. And she took a great interest in me, and I was a little taken aback by it at first because I had never had someone pursue me in friendship like she did. And so the way that she pursued me in friendship is we were both new to our jobs, and she immediately comes over to me and she befriends me. And she starts asking me questions about me. And they started off like as you're getting to know someone, they're just like the general questions. But then as we got to know each other and share our lives and stories with each other, she started to ask questions that like kept probing and probing deeper. And it wasn't like she was trying to fix me. I could tell it was out of a genuineness, because if she would ask me a question and I would respond, she would ask me another question on top of that based what I just responded. And I was like, how does she ask these good questions? Like, is she a counselor on this side? Like, what is going on? And so it just stuck out to me because that is how we can love people so well, is by being present with them and by being so intentional in our conversations that when people say things, we're like, we're connecting with them. We show that empathy where it's like if I said something that triggers something in her curiosity, it's like, I wonder where that came from. Or I wonder what part of her story brought that out. Like, I'm curious to know more about that. And so this kind of interest is what we are called to do as believers, and Jesus invites us into this, is to show interest in each other. That's how we can care for one another deeply and go beneath the surface. And this is going to be uncomfortable because you can ask a question and somebody can be like, I I don't want to answer that. And that could cut off the conversation and make it really awkward. Let's just be real. It could be really awkward. But we all long to be loved and cared for and to be seen. And I just remember, this stuck with me, this will always stick with me, it's just how I felt so known and so loved by her because she actually cared to get to know me. And before I was like, yeah, I know people are pretty cool, like we all have our own stories, but when she started asking me questions and I started sharing more about myself that I didn't even know, I was like, wow, I guess I am a pretty cool person, you know? Like we all have a lot to offer. And so just this genuine curiosity is something that Jesus invites us into because this encourages deep, deep friendship. And then next, Jesus invites us to honor and build up others. And Jesus is a perfect example of this in the way that he interacts with Judas and the way that he interacts with Peter. So first with Judas, we don't really see Judas in this passage that we read, but the first verse that we see is, when he had left, Jesus said. And so when he had left, that means Judas was out of the room. He wasn't there to defend himself if anyone said something about him. Jesus could have easily been like, you know what? I was just waiting for that guy to leave. I am so frustrated with him. Let me spill all the tea that he is about to do. And so he could have easily backstabbed Judas and talked ill about him like that. But we see Jesus's character. He's like, okay, he left, that's going to happen. I'm going to focus on the people in front of me because this is who I want to pursue and I want them to hear this command. And so that is so loving of Jesus. And it's so safe because we know that like whenever we share something or whenever we're around people who speak kindly and who don't speak ill about each other, who don't gossip, then that's a safe place. So Jesus created a really safe place. And by not talking about Judas, the other disciples saw his actions and they were probably like, well, I know Jesus isn't going to talk about me either. When actually they probably already knew that because they had been walking with Jesus for quite a while during his ministry. But still, it creates a safe place. And by not sharing or gossiping about Judas, Jesus was saying, hey, I'm not going to talk about anyone else. I'm going to talk about what matters, and I'm going to honor each one of you equally. Because Jesus knew that Judas was going to betray him, but he still chose to honor him. And so then we see with Peter was so passionate about wanting to lay down his life for Jesus. And he was like, no, Jesus, like I can follow you. I'm going to lay down my life for you. And honestly, aren't we all like Peter? At least I think I'm like Peter a lot because I'm like, Jesus, I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to do this for you. And then when the time gets tough, a lot of times it's like, maybe I a little overpromised there. It can be a lot easier to talk and then not actually follow through. But I'm a lot more like Peter than I want to admit. But seeing the way that Jesus interacts with Peter here is so tender and so soft because Jesus is like, will you? He asks him a question. He's like, will you? And then he tells him the truth. And it's still loving. Jesus doesn't say to Peter like, oh no, I know your character, you're not gonna do that. Jesus could have easily poured shame on Peter, but he didn't. He chose to still honor him amidst his future failures and his future way that he was going to betray Jesus, essentially. So we are invited to honor and build others up. And in Proverbs 17:9, it says, whoever conceals an offense promotes love, but whoever gossips about it separates friends. So whoever conceals an offense promotes love. That means that whenever someone does something wrong against us, that we're not to go out and tell everyone about it because that would separate friends. But concealing it, working on it, working it out with the friend individually, that is what we are called to do. And so we can act in response to this, and we can speak well of our brothers and sisters. If we have something that we feel that's going on in between us, that we notice there's a barrier in between us, we can go to them directly and take it up with them. If someone like really, really impacts you and really hurts you, I challenge you the next time, before going to anyone else and telling them about the situation and what happens, Go in your quiet time to God, pray and seek his will first. If this is a situation where you're like, I still need direction from a friend, I don't know how to handle this conversation, that is totally fine. I would challenge you in that situation to keep the other friend unnamed, to still honor that person and honor their name in respect of them, just because we don't want to gossip about them, but we also want to honor their name. And so we've talked about the first two ways, and then we're going to take our brief intermission right now. And so in this 3 minutes, you can grab coffee, water, go to the bathroom, and we will reconvene then. All right, so we left off, we talked about the first two ways that we can love like Jesus and what he is inviting us into. And so the next way that Jesus calls us to love is he invites us to care more about the friend than the friendship. So what this means is it's not to say like, oh, I don't care about my friendships. I'm just going to be reckless and only care for the people and not think about the big picture. No, that's not what I'm saying. But caring more about the friend, that means that if a friend has hurt us or has impacted us in some way, or if we have hurt one of our friends in some way, we are to care about that friend so much that even if we bring whatever is going on inside of us to our friend, that if it ends up in a loss of a friendship, but we know we cared for that person, then we are going to care for that person. So who would say that they are comfortable with going to someone when they're uncomfortable and saying like, hey, you really hurt me when you said this? No one. Put your hand down. Put your hand down. If you do, come on up here. We can. No, just kidding. But it's really hard. It is really hard to go to someone and say, hey, when you said this, I was really impacted and I was really hurt. And that's not easy and it's not comfortable, but ultimately it's how we're called to love. Because what's the opposite? The opposite is that we stay in that friendship, we don't share about how we've been impacted, and there's just a root of bitterness inside of us, and there's a wall that goes up in between that friendship. And is that friendship then really a friendship anymore? And so the invitation is to care more about the friend than the friendship. And so that, like I just said, it can cause rejection. And it's very vulnerable to put yourself out there and say, hey, this really hurt me. And being vulnerable is uncomfortable, but it shows us a tenderness, and we want to love like Jesus and mimic him. And we see his tenderness all throughout what we've been reading so far in John. And so we're called to that same tenderness as well, and to love our friends. Ephesians 4:3 says, making every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Making every effort. This means that we should pursue our friends, and if we have something that is standing in between us and our friends, then we should handle that immediately. Make every effort to resolve it, because as believers, we are recognized by our love, and we are united in our love and united in our peace. And when there's stuff in between our friendships, that's not peaceful. That is stressful, and that is very, very stressful. Yeah, that's very stressful. So it eliminates the peace. And so in order to keep the peace and move towards each other, we are to make every effort to resolve any conflict. And so Jesus also invites us to know and believe that we are loved. So the first three ways that we talked about are ways that we can actively love others. This is a way where we can learn to love ourselves, and we can only love ourselves through Jesus and watching his example. And so an example in my life is when I started to know and believe that I was loved was when I went to Potter's Wheel. So I went to 2 Potter's Wheel retreats, and then I went to a Potter's Wheel one, and each time more and more was revealed to me. Like, my eyes were open to more of my story, which is so hard to go into your story, but it is so sweet because you realize at the depths of your story and the depths of your ick that Jesus is there the whole time, and he has never left you. And it's just such a beautiful portrayal of God's love, because even at my ickiest, my yuckiest, I was still surrounded by people in Potter's Wheel who loved me and who cared for me and were for me. And I know Jesus was there all the same as well. And so by knowing that we are loved by Jesus, by knowing in our deep, deep heart, our soul, that we are loved by Jesus, that allows us to do the first 3. Because the first 3 take a lot of courage. I mentioned several times that it's very scary to step out and pursue people, to be vulnerable, to take an interest in others. But when we know we are loved and we are secure in Jesus' love, we can share with that friend who hurt us and know that if they do reject us, that is not a reflection on my worth, because I know that I am deeply loved and cared for by the Creator. Does that mean we don't grieve the loss of our friend? No. Because friendships are deep, and that is something that we are to grieve. But is my worth going to be shaken because of that? No. Can we take a deep interest in others more? Yes. The more that I learn about my story, the more that I walked into my story through Potter's Wheel, the more I figured out why I do the things that I do. And I'm like, did this action come from this? And I started to put pieces together. And so then when other people would share their story or share something they were going through, I'm like, we're not all that different. And that's something you realize in Potter's Wheel, is that when everyone shares their story, is like, you're not all that different. And you all, like, yes, you have different stories, you grow up in different environments, but we all long for love and intimacy and impact. And so the way that I processed through my story, now I'm able to help other people process through their stories too, which creates that deep connection and that love. And I'm able to have an empathy for other people now because I feel the empathy and love that Jesus has had for me from going through Potter's Wheel. And lastly, so when we love like Jesus, others will see God. This is amazing to me, that God reveals himself through the way that we love. In verse 35, it says, by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. How cool is that? By our love, people can experience and see God through us. Like, if that doesn't blow your mind, like, it absolutely should, because how God trusts us as broken sinners that we can love and brokenly love. We're not going to love perfectly, but he will reveal himself to others because of how we love. That is beautiful. That is a beautiful picture of redemption and just his deep love for us. And as Christians, as believers, we automatically have a mark on our back. When you say, like, yeah, I believe in God, I'm a follower of God, or use the word Christian, then there is going to be people who are like, whatever they've experienced about Christians in the past, that's automatically going to be put on you. And that's with anything else, right? Like, if you hear about any kind of political party, everybody assumes one side, oh, you believe this or believe that. But we have the opportunity to show what believing in and following Jesus looks like. We have an opportunity to show the God of love, to follow the ultimate commandment, and to emulate Jesus in our actions. And that's a huge gift and a huge honor. And I just want that to sink in, that through the way that we love and through what others see in our actions, they can see God. So I want to I guess, yeah, I'll talk about this too. So transformation, this is a great visual representation of what transformation looks like whenever we become followers of Jesus. And so before, if anyone, I'm sure most people have seen Captain America. I am not a huge Marvel person, but this is, I know, but this is just a perfect example. So Captain America, he was a little smaller and just didn't have much muscle. Then he went into this chamber and he pops out all of these muscles magically. If that was real, cool, that would be great, but it's not. But we can internally transform and change through Jesus when we allow him to love us and we accept that love. And then when we transform and we change, and so that others can see a visible change in us. Because that's one of the most powerful things, is like going back to the story where I talked about Grace, is when she was showing me what love looked like, that was one of the most impactful things that anyone had ever done for me. Because I clearly saw the difference between, hey, this is a surface friendship with relationships that I had had before where it's everyone cares about themselves and is not really intentionally caring about other people. And then with Grace, I saw, wow, this is actually how we're supposed to love and care for each other and get to know each other beneath the surface. And so when you act out of love, people will be shocked. It is different. It's not the pattern of this world. And that is what's so cool that we can do as believers, is we can be different. We can be the change. We can show the transformation and what God has done in our hearts. And with all of this, it is going to be challenging. It's not going to be easy, and it will require sacrifice on our end. And when we think of love, we should think of the cross, just like Jesus did. And how Jesus took up his cross, he sacrificed his life. We also have to take up our cross and sacrifice some of our desires. And that's what Jesus calls to, but he doesn't leave us alone in that. Jesus says, just as I have loved you, so you also love one another. So we can know that we are fully and completely loved, and we had someone who went before us and did everything and experienced everything that we have and will go through. And that's comforting, and that's a beautiful story. And so I want to close with this. This is a prayer where Jesus was praying for believers right before he was arrested. And about to be crucified. And so this is just a perfect portrayal of Jesus's heart for us and how our heart can be postured for other people, that other believers, friends, and non-believers. And so this is John 17, verses 20 through 26. Jesus said, I pray not only for these, but also for those who believe in me through their word. May they all be one, as you, Father, are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe you sent me. I have given them the glory you have given me, so that they may be one, as we are one. I am in them and you are in me, so that they may be made completely one, that the world may know you have sent me and have loved them as you have loved me. Father, I want those you have given me to be with me where I am, so that they will see my glory, which you have given me, because you loved me before the world's foundation. Righteous Father, the world has not known you. However, I have known you, and they have known that you sent me. I made your name known to them and will continue to make it known, so that the love you have loved me with may be in them and I may be in them. How loving of Jesus to say that. His heart is for us. And I pray that our hearts are postured like that towards each other, that whenever we are facing hard times and whenever we are going through something, that we are still like, Lord, I want to seek you. I want to be united, and I want to be loved, and I want to be united with my brothers and sisters in love, because that is what we are called to. We are all united as believers in love. If you are not a believer, I would encourage you to seek Jesus, to seek his love and the depth of love that he has for you, because it is so, so beautiful. And it's a tenderness that the world doesn't understand. It's hard for us to understand. And I just encourage you to start pursuing that. If you are a believer, I would encourage you to act out at least one of these. If you've got something stirring up inside of you with someone that you love, I encourage you to take it to them this week. Pray about it and bring it to them so you can mend that relationship. Take an interest in other people, because we are all worth caring about. We are all reflect Jesus in our own unique way. And I encourage you to just love one another relentlessly, because we have a Father who has loved us and a perfect example of how we can love one another. Let's pray. Lord, I am overcome by your love, and I, every time, look to the cross, am just astounded with your selflessness and just how deep you love us. Lord, you are the perfect example of how we can love one another. I ask that you give us the strength to walk in your love and to continue to pursue you through our busy lives and through our hectic schedules, but that you always keep love at the top of our minds so that we can love and pursue you ultimately. In your name I pray. Amen.